The forest whispered with an ancient song, a melody woven into the very roots of the trees and the shimmering canopy above. The golden leaves of Lothlórien caught the fading light, glowing like fragments of a distant memory. Among them stood Haldir, a sentinel of the golden wood, his silver hair catching the breeze, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. To those who saw him, he seemed almost ageless, as if the weight of years had touched him only lightly. But within him was a quiet sorrow, a deep understanding of both the beauty and fragility of his world. He was a guardian, bound not just by duty but by love for his people and the realm they called home. Haldir was no mere watcher of borders, he was a bridge between worlds, the voice of Lothlórien to those who ventured into its sacred realm. Yet his own tale, though quiet, was not without its shadows. He was a child of a fading age, an elf who had seen the world change in ways that no song could fully capture. He had walked under the stars before the sun and moon had risen, his feet treading paths now lost to time. The forests he loved so dearly had once stretched unbroken, their leaves whispering secrets to the winds. But war had come, and with it, sorrow. The first shadow that fell upon Haldir's life was the encroaching darkness of Sauron. Though the Golden Wood remained a sanctuary, the echoes of battles fought in far lands reached even its heart. Haldir had stood on the borders as rumors of Morgoth's heir spread, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, his heart heavy with the knowledge that peace could never last. He was a warrior as much as a guardian, trained to defend his people against the forces that sought to destroy them. Yet even as he drew his sword, there was a gentleness to his spirit, a longing for a world where such violence was no longer needed. When the Fellowship of the Ring stumbled into Lothlórien, weary and burdened by their quest, it was Haldir who first met them. His gaze was sharp, and his demeanor cautious, for he knew the weight of what they carried and the peril it brought. Yet, beneath his guarded words, there was an unspoken compassion. He saw in their faces the same resolve that burned within him, the willingness to fight for what they loved, even at great cost. Though he warned them of the dangers that lay ahead, he also offered them what solace he could, guiding them through the golden woods to the heart of his realm. In Haldir's eyes, the Fellowship was a fragile spark of hope in a world teetering on the edge of despair. He understood the burden they bore, the ring's power and the shadow it cast over all who came near it. As they walked beneath the towering Malorn trees, he shared with them the beauty of his homeland, as if to remind them what they were fighting for. His words, though few, carried the weight of centuries, and his presence was like a balm to their weariness. But Haldir's story was not confined to the borders of Lothlórien. When the call to war came, when the horns of Helm's Deep sounded their desperate plea for aid, he did not hesitate. The elves of Lothlórien could have stayed hidden, their golden realm untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But Haldir knew that isolation was no longer a choice. If the darkness was to be defeated, it would take more than the strength of men or the wisdom of wizards. It would require the courage of all free peoples, standing together against the shadow. When he arrived at Helm's Deep, his presence was a beacon of hope. The men of Rohan, battered and outnumbered, looked to him and his company with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The elves were a vision of grace and power, their bows strong and their swords gleaming like starlight. Haldir stood at their head, his face calm but resolute. He knew the odds they faced, the likelihood that they would not return to the golden woods they loved so dearly. Yet he stood firm, his voice steady as he pledged his aid to the defenders of the Hornburg. The battle that followed was unlike anything Haldir had ever faced. The Uruk-hai came in waves, their dark armor glinting under the moonlight, their war cries piercing the night. Haldir fought with the skill and precision of one who had spent centuries honing his craft, his blade flashing as he struck down foe after foe. But for every enemy he felled, more took their place. The walls of Helm's Deep shook under the assault, and the air was thick with the cries of the wounded and the dying. In the chaos of the battle, Haldir's calm began to falter. He had always known war, had always understood its cost, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of his kin falling around him. The elves, who had once danced beneath the stars and sung songs of beauty, were now locked in a brutal struggle for survival. Haldir fought harder, his movements driven not just by duty but by grief. He knew that each life lost was a light extinguished, a piece of his people's legacy that would never be reclaimed. And then, in the midst of the carnage, Haldir fell. The blow came suddenly, a flash of pain that stole his breath and brought him to his knees. As his vision blurred, he saw the faces of those he had sworn to protect, the men of Rohan, the Fellowship, his kin. He had given everything for them, for the hope that their world might endure even as his own faded. The golden leaves of Lothlórien seemed so far away now, a memory slipping through his fingers. But there was no regret in his heart, only a quiet acceptance. He had lived as a guardian, and he would die as one. Haldir's death was a wound that could not be healed, a loss that echoed far beyond the walls of Helm's Deep. Those who fought beside him would never forget the elf who had stood with them in their darkest hour, who had given his life so that others might see another sunrise. In the years that followed, his name became a symbol of the unity that had turned the tide against the darkness, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there were those who would stand and fight for what was right. The golden woods of Lothlórien still whisper his name, their leaves rustling with the memory of the guardian who gave everything for the world he loved. And though the years pass and the stories fade, Haldir's spirit endures, a quiet light in the shadows of history.